Hello and welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted, as always, to be joined by Danny. We're proudly in association with sharpbetting.co.uk. Please check out their website for all their tips on football, boxing, horse racing. Everything you need is there on their website. Danny, we're here for a reaction over last night's incredible action. It's Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn. What a fight! What an ending to the fight. I'm going to go straight in with this here. Um, the rematch clause is there. You know, it's been agreed. I've seen September, I've seen October, all dependent on whether Chris Eubank Jr. has broke his jaw or not. But what do you think happens in a rematch, Danny? Do you see the same again? Do you see Conor Benn coming in with a slightly different style? He was swinging wildly at times. Eubank was quite tentative in the early rounds, and then for me took over in sort of mid to late rounds. So, who wins the rematch, and do you see a different fight?
Yeah, cheers, mate. Firstly, I'm not 100% sure there will be a rematch,
Hmm.
despite the fact Turki Al Sheikh has gone public and said he wants it to happen, and more often than not, that means it will happen. Eddie Hearn's comments in the press conference were interesting. In a relatively competitive fight like that, normally he'd be banging the drum for a rematch, especially when it's the most financially lucrative option. Whereas he did say, I would sort of half want Conor to move back down to 147, and I do think it would be better for both fighters. In saying that, if a rematch was to happen, it's difficult because in the face of it, you would say Eubank again, but it is dependent on if there's a rehydration clause, what weight it's going to be at. Because if it was under the same terms, I think it would take a lot out of Eubank again. It would give Ben more time to get bigger, to get better, to to get used to going the distance, the 12 rounds at a good pace. And saying that, I think regardless, I would favour Eubank, even if it was under the same terms. However, as I've said at the start, I'm not sure it will happen, and I don't really want it to happen. I don't think it's good for either of them. For Ben, in terms of his career, I don't think it's good. I think he would, one, struggle to get back down to 147, and two, I think it would take a lot out of him. Another 12 round fight up at middleweight against Chris Eubank Jr., even if he was depleted. And for Eubank, I think you're getting into territory of what's this doing to his long lasting health.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. We've seen how much it took out of Eubank, getting down to the weight. Conor Benn at times, obviously fought to the end, but I think at times the extra weight it did show. There were certain points in certain rounds for me where, he was almost taking breathers, couldn't keep up with the pace at times, and almost had to take that little breather to get a little bit back. So I do sort of, do you know what? I do completely agree with yourself there. I personally don't think we see a rematch. I don't think it makes any sense. It was pretty conclusive for me. Some people have called it a robbery. A lot of people within the media, of varying forms have said the same thing. But if they were to rematch, Danny, let's go on the premise that a rematch has been set in stone. It's been agreed. I've almost seen hinting from Eddie Hearn that, it should be more favourable to Conor Benn next time, even potentially a bit of a lower weight. Do you think if they rematch, there would be another rehydration clause? And what weight would it be exactly the same? Would there be any differences, or do you think it would literally be sort of 2.0?
Yeah, Eddie makes a lot of interesting comments when his fighters lose a big fight, doesn't he? I don't think if there was to be a rematch, it would there would be another rehydration clause, and I don't think it would be at 160 again, and that's why I sort of think it won't happen because Eubank, as the winning fighter, holds all the cards. I know they've said the terms have been agreed. I'd be interested on the details of those terms, if that includes rehydration clauses, weight, etc., because I can't imagine Eubank and his representatives would have agreed to a rematch with another rehydration clause at 160 if he was to win the first fight. That would blow my mind. If there is to be a rematch, it would be, I think, from Conor Benn agreeing to fight maybe 162, 163, maybe with a rehydration clause, maybe at 11 pound, 12 pound, and I can't see to that either. I mean, I'd make Eubank a big favourite under more favourable terms. But no, I don't think if there is a rematch, it'll be under the same stipulations we had first time round. No.
Yeah, I think like you say, for me, it's if they have a rematch, it's going to be on more favourable to Eubank, and based off this first fight, more favourable terms to Eubank is just pointless for Conor Benn. I think there were struggles within the fight, and if you let Eubank be at a more natural weight, I think it's just going to be a more conclusive victory for himself. Um, just a final one, Danny, based off what you've said there, it's likely, like you say, Turkey has said it's an agreement. There's two fights in there. Eddie said one thing, said another. From Eddie's perspective, I know obviously he wants to make as much money as possible, but do you think from Eddie Hearn's perspective, you can see Eddie Hearn pushing for this rematch?
I don't know because like Ben's stock as a fighter went up in defeat last night. His
Hmm.
profile will have went up, and short term the rematch is the cash grab.
Hmm.
But if you move Ben down to welterweight now and be careful with him and maybe target a fight with your Mario Barrios, and then there's names domestically, there's names internationally that you don't have to throw him into unification with Ennis or something. Or he's probably going to move up anyway. You can build something more long term there, and we've had this conversation before about who the UK's next sort of star could be, and Conor Benn's not going to make Eddie Hearn the money Anthony Joshua made him or anything like that, but he could make him more than he could make in a rematch with Chris Eubank Jr. if they guide him correctly. Whereas I think if you throw him in a rematch with Chris Eubank Jr. at
Hmm.
163 pounds with no rehydration clause, you could finish him. Like you could finish him at 28. Like that's no exaggeration, especially when he moves up there again. Does 147 become unmakeable, and then you have to go to 154? And look at the 154 division. What's waiting for him there? Very tough fights. A lot tougher than would wait for him at welterweight for a world title. That's for sure. So I think Eddie's thinking maybe a mix of compassion and business. Maybe if Conor Benn was a 34 or something, fuck it, we'll do the rematch. But there's you get 5 6 years of Conor Benn, and I think you're taking a big risk with them if you throw him a rematch with Eubank again at 160 or higher.
Yeah, completely agree with yourself. Like you say, it's money talks in this sport, and obviously money evidently talks with this fight itself. The way everything. Realistically, did we need to see the fight? Probably not, but it got a lot of numbers, did a lot of views. In terms of the build up, everything is probably the biggest fight I've seen in my generation in terms of everything surrounding it. So from a promoter's perspective, selfishly, of course you'd do the rematch, but also from a promoter's perspective, it's going to be a case of if they do it on more favourable terms for Eubank, Ben loses again, although his stock went up in defeat, if he loses quite handily this time, then what do you do with Conor Benn? If he goes back down to 147, is he going to make it back down to 147? He's been away from the weight for would have been what? Obviously with the rematch, probably 2.5 years. Can he make the weight again? Is it easier fights at 154? Absolutely not. So it's good questions. Turkey obviously wants the rematch. Money, money, money. Does it make sense for Ben? Probably not. Does it make sense for Eubank? I'd argue it probably does because it at his stage of his career makes him even more money. On his terms, it's probably an easier night's work. So there's so many sort of differing factors on it. But guys, we don't want to go on for too much longer. Please let us know what you think down below in the comments. Will we see a rematch? Do you think there should be a rematch? If there is a rematch, whose terms will it be on? Will there be rehydration clauses? Will it be the same result? As always, guys, please like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think. And once again, Danny, thank you for joining me tonight.
Cheers out.